When I was 6 years old, my family moved to Virginia because my dad had a new job opportunity. We moved to this really old house that every step that you took, you'd hear the floorboards cracking. During the summer, I met this girl named Lucy. She knocked on my door one day and asked if I wanted to play, so for weeks, me and Lucy grew closer. We'd play hopscotch, jump rope, hand games, and hide and seek. One day, we were getting ready to play hopscotch, and my mom came outside telling me to come in and eat dinner. I asked my mom if Lucy could come too. My mom had asked, "Who's Lucy?" I looked back at Lucy and I said, "She's right here." My mom replied, "Right where?" When I turned back around, Lucy disappears. I called out for Lucy, but my mom yells out, "There isn't anyone out there. Get your butt in the house. It's time to come eat." It gets a little bit paranormal after this incident, but come back for part 2 if you want to know why Lucy disappeared. This is part 2 of why my friend Lucy disappeared. A week later after the incident happened, I saw Lucy playing outside with a little baby boy. He had to be around 2 years old. I quickly ran outside and said, "Hey, where'd you go the other day?" Lucy replied, "I wasn't feeling good, so I went home." I asked her, "Is that your baby?" And Lucy laughed and said, "No, this is my baby brother. I take care of him." And I asked again, "Don't your parents do that?" Lucy said, "No, they couldn't save us." I said, "Save?" And Lucy gets a little frustrated and said, "They just abandoned us, but we don't need them anymore. We take care of ourselves." Lucy then says, "We gotta get home. We'll see you another time." She took her brother's hand and turned the corner. I watched them go, but when I looked down the corner they turned, they both disappeared. I'm running out of time. Sorry guys. Come back for a part 3. What's the most messed up thing someone has ever told you after barely knowing them? Well, I'm gonna go first. So in high school, I would take public transportation back home. Well, this one lady got on a bus with her daughter and sat next to me. I looked over and told her that her daughter looked very pretty. Then out of nowhere, she just starts crying. I asked, "Ma'am, are you alright?" And she says, "It's my husband." I didn't want to be invasive, but I asked, "Did something happen?" Then she goes on a 10-minute rant about how abusive her husband was and that she tried to stay for the baby. She was scared, but she finally had the courage to go. I felt bad and asked her, "Is there anything I could do to help?" And she proceeds to tell me that everything is fine. I'm like, "Are you sure?" She replies, "Yes, everything is fine. He had a peanut allergy and he died last week." And I'm like shook. And I said, "I'm so sorry for your loss." And she responds, No, it's better that he's gone anyway." And I'm like, huh? Right after, she prepares to get off the bus and she grabs her daughter. I said bye. Right before she gets off, she said she put peanuts in his food. When I was 24, me and my sister moved into an apartment together. At the time, I was going to college to get my master's, and she was going in to get her degree. The rent was $500 a month. I know, cheap. We only paid $250 each. But the neighborhood was bad. There was a lot of crackhead, gangs. There was a shooting just about every week. I know, just crazy. Anyways, one day in the middle of the night, we get a hard banging on our door, and it's a lady calling out for help. When I opened it, she had a black eye, she was bruised up, and her forehead was bleeding. I asked what's going on, and she replied her boyfriend is trying to kick her and her kids out of their place. She explained she has a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old, and her boyfriend is throwing all of their things out. So I walked over back to her apartment, which was 2 floors down. When we finally reached the apartment, the whole apartment was on fire. She screamed and said her babies were in there. Come back for part 2. This is part 2 of how my neighbor's boyfriend set her apartment on fire with her children inside. If you didn't watch part 1, go watch that so you can understand this part. So, like I said, the apartment was on fire and she was screaming about her kids. And she tried to run in and get her kids, but I stopped her because there was no way she and her kids were going to make it out alive. Few seconds later, her boyfriend walks up and says, "Let her go." And she runs over to him and swings on him a couple times and says, "What did you do? Get them out." And he replied, "I told you to leave, right?" She falls to her knees, and at that point, she just stops crying. So I run upstairs calling for help, telling everyone to get out and call the fire department. The fire starts to quickly spread, and everyone is coming out of their apartments. When I went back to the area where the lady was, her boyfriend disappeared, and I picked her up from off the ground. I brung her into the parking lot where everyone else was. After 20 minutes, the fire department finally shows up. Come back for part 3. This is part 3 of how my neighbor's boyfriend set her apartment on fire with her children inside. So, like I said, the fire department finally shows up after 20 minutes. I told them there were kids inside, and they went up to find them. They put the fire out right after a firefighter came up to me and said there was no one in there. And I told him no, there were 2 kids. A couple minutes later, a few detectives and cops came up to me and asked me a few questions about the scene, asking things like if I know who started it and about my neighbors. Couple minutes later, there was an old man, which I found out was one of my neighbors. He came from the side of the apartment complex screaming that there was a little boy on his back, lying on the ground, saying that he couldn't move. So quickly, the detective go over to where my neighbor said the boy was. I'm running out of time. Part 4 will be up soon. This is part 4 of how my neighbor's boyfriend set her apartment on fire with her children inside. After one of my neighbors claimed they saw a little boy on the ground in the back of the apartment complex, and the boy's arm was pillows wrapped up in a comforter. When the detective got the paramedics to pick the boy up, they took the comforter he had and they opened it, and inside was a baby. After the whole situation was over, they took me in for questioning. Also, by the way, they admitted the lady into the hospital as well because she was bruised up really bad, and anytime anyone asked her anything, she was mute. During my time in the police station, they told me about the little boy. Come to find out, that little boy on the ground in back of the apartment complex was her son. They said he wrapped his baby sister up to protect her from getting hurt. Baby girl was fine. The pillows he wrapped her in softened her fall. But for the little boy, he was paralyzed from